Hi, this is Michael William Denny of ThunderShamanism.com, and so today I want to put the brakes on uh, the latest video series that I started, and I realize I have to pull back and I have to focus on what this was intended to be, what this is all about. In order to make real progress in spiritual work, energetic work, you have to be a critical thinker. In fact, I'm going to say this. If you really want to make progress on any level of spiritual or energetic work, I mean, not even to mention life, but just in this area, you have to make critical thinking your first priority. The most important thing in your life has to be being a master of critical thinking. So I want to make that clear, and all of my work, whether I'm talking about ancestral work, whether I'm talking about, the deities, whether I'm talking about language, whether I'm talking about energy work, all the things that I teach, all of it is based on making you a critical thinker. Whether I realize it or not, I realize that today, that is the basis of everything that I do, is to make people critical thinkers, because it is my belief that if all of humanity could think critically, we would live in a utopia. We would live in bliss. And all of the problems, all of our human problems, whether it's financial, whether it's political, whether it's the environment, whatever it is, it all comes back to a lack of critical thinking. So, a lack of critical thinking is incredibly dangerous. So, to give you an example, if I'm talking with most of you who aren't born-again Christians, and if I talk to you about how illogical Christians are and how illogical their thinking is and how destructive that thinking is and how destructive that religion is, and we can look at, did Jesus really exist and all that kind of stuff, most of you are going to be with me because we share an assumption. We share a common assumption, and so from an emotional standpoint, you're open to what I'm saying, and you've probably come to those same conclusions. But if I bring up a subject that goes against your emotional agenda, then you're going to react very differently. So before I go further in this political discussion that I started, which the whole point of the political discussion was to point out that half of the electorate of the United States is not thinking critically. So let's go back and talk about what critical thinking is. And here's what I want you to do. Because now I'm giving you a real test of your critical thinking. And I want you to listen to what I'm saying in this video, and I want you to apply it to yourself in the videos to follow. Because now I'm seeing, as I put this out, I didn't think about it. I was just blurting out my thoughts and my feelings, and I put it up on my channel, and then when I went, oh, wait a second. I may alienate my viewers here. I may lose all my subscribers because the majority of them are, probably on the right side of the political spectrum, and they're not going to hear what I'm saying. And and I've opened this Pandora's box, and I can't put the cat back in. I mean, he's out. That's it. So now I got to do some damage control. But I'm realizing now that I can make a real valuable spiritual lesson in this, and this is what's most important. So I want you to take your critical thinking skills and apply it to the other videos that I'm saying, and forget about whether or not you agree with me. That's not it. It's about you asking yourself, am I operating from my emotional agendas? Am I allowing my emotional agendas to color my beliefs and to dictate my conclusions? Are my emotional agendas allowing me to be manipulated by somebody else? I want you to ask yourself those questions. Because if you want to make progress, you have to ask yourself that question every single day. Whenever your emotions come up, especially in the beginning, you've got to be willing to stop and ask yourself, am I allowing my fears, my personal agendas to dictate my thoughts and my conclusions? So having said that, let's talk about, once again, what is critical thinking? The first and most important rule of critical thinking is this: everyone has an emotional agenda at all times. At every moment in your existence, you are operating from an emotional agenda. So a critical thinker, the first thing that they do is they know that they have emotional agendas. It's not like they're above it all and I've seen the light. No, I have emotional agendas all the time, every single moment of every day. And if I want to live my life in a way that makes me happy, and if I want to make progress in my spiritual work, I have to constantly be asking myself, okay, what is my emotional agenda here? How is it coloring my thinking? Is it allowing me to make faulty conclusions? Okay? And I have listen, I go every week, a group of people that I go hang out with. And the main purpose of this group is just exactly that, is to call each other on our emotional agendas. So I'm no different than you. And I get trapped in my emotional agendas all the time. And I have people whom I trust who mirror that back to me so that I can continue to keep working on my ability to see reality from an objective standpoint. Okay? So that's the first rule. The first rule is everyone has an emotional agenda at all times. That means you. If you're listening to me right now, whatever emotions you're feeling right now, you have an emotional agenda. And the question is your emotional agenda serving you? Is your emotional agenda helping you or hindering you from seeing the truth? And if your emotional agenda is coming from a place of fear, then you can be manipulated very easily. The easiest way to manipulate people is through their fears. So I want to ask you, when you look at the emotional landscape or the political landscape, are your fears driving your conclusions? Now, you can still come to an objective conclusion and still be aware of your fear, but you have to be in a place to be able to honestly say, yes, I am not allowing my emotional agenda to get in the way of my ability to look at the objective facts. Okay? So that's the first thing. Everyone has an emotional agenda. Once you understand that you have an emotional agenda, then you can go into the next 3 steps of critical thinking as I'm laying it out. And the first one is you have to ask yourself, what is true and what is false? We already talked about this. Now here's where things usually get messed up, because most of the time, especially people in my experience who are operating from an emotional agenda, they have blanket black and white statements for everything. One example would be Trump is a con man. Black and white statement. So is that true? Is that false? Hillary Clinton is a crook. Black and white statement. Is that true? Is that false? Well, then we move into the next. Now, most people stop there and they either go to one extreme or the other. Somebody's either this or they're that. And then so for instance, if I make the conclusion that Donald Trump is a con man, then every single of my other conclusions about him are going to be based on that emotional agenda. I now have a need to prove to myself that he's a con man. And I'm going to look for all of the evidence to prove that he's a con man. Go on the other side of the spectrum, Hillary Clinton is a crook. Now, if you have an emotional connection, if you get a rush out of that, she's a crook. That's an emotional agenda. And now, whenever you look to, you're going to look for evidence to bolster that emotional agenda. And so all of your conclusions are going to be based on that. So that means if somebody comes to you with, if somebody comes to me and tells me, Donald Trump is a really great father, Donald Trump, gave a lot of money to so-and-so, and they start telling me all the good things about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a great negotiator. I'm not going to be able to see that if I have an emotional agenda to prove to myself that he's a con man. I'm going to dismiss all of that. So I have to be able to go to the next, which is, when is something sometimes true and sometimes false? Now, I believe everybody here can agree with me that Donald Trump is sometimes a con man. And he writes it in his book. If you ever read his book, he talks about how he plays to people's fantasies and tells them what he wants to hear, tells them what they want to hear. So he admits that he is a con man. He admits it. He's admitted it numerous times. Does that mean he's a con man all the time? Does that mean he's a con man in the worst way? Not necessarily. When is it sometimes true and sometimes false? And then we get to the third one, which is probably the most difficult to understand, which is when is something partially true and partially false? And we talked about that. I talked to you about that. But again, if you have an emotional agenda, you're not going to be able to see that. You're not going to be able to make, and the stronger your emotional agenda is, the less of an ability you're going to have to make an accurate conclusion about what you're seeing. So, now that I've opened this Pandora's box, I got to do something. I can't just turn it off. We got to follow through with it. So I'm going to upload the rest of the videos that I made, and I want you to apply this to yourself. And I want you to, while you're watching the video, I want you to ask yourself the first question: what are my emotional agendas? What is my emotional reaction to what he's saying? If you have a strong emotional reaction, you have an emotional agenda. Nothing wrong with that. We all do. But the question is, is that emotional agenda going to influence your ability to make accurate conclusions based on what I'm telling you? Number two, when is what I'm saying true and when is it false? When is what I'm saying partially true and partially false? When is what I'm saying sometimes true and sometimes false? So I want to just give you that. So that's it for now. We'll see where this goes. This is very interesting. I've opened a Pandora's box and we'll see where this goes.